President Theodore Roosevelt once said, "I took Panama to build the canal." The Americans live like colonial settlers in the neat little towns of the canal zone. This sense of American domination has led to many anti-American demonstrations in Panama in recent years by people who think the Americans ought to get out.
At the present time, the Panamanian people are not mentally set up for this type of operation, and nor do they have the physical and mechanical backing to do so.
The only demand that the Panamanians want is to get back the canal zone.
Well, how are you going to set about it? By revolution?
Yes.
Do you mean a violent revolution?
Yes.
Hello. Around the world, there are a few small strategic sites that everybody recognizes as important, usually because they control some vital line of communications. Places like the Dardanelles in the First World War, or Singapore in the Second. But two of them are outstanding, Suez and Panama, the two great international canals, one of them dividing Africa from Asia and linking Europe with India, the other dividing North America from South America and joining the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. We all remember what happened over Suez, but what about Panama? Here it is.
Unlike Suez, Panama is both a canal and a country. In fact, Panama the country was created by and for Panama the canal. Until 60 years ago, this little strip of Central America belonged to Colombia. Then the United States supported the secession of Panama from Colombia and promptly signed a very favorable treaty which gave it full rights to build and operate a canal across the isthmus. The man behind all this was President Theodore Roosevelt. "I took Panama," he once said, "to build the canal." Like all canals, it's really just a ditch. But it's more complicated than most because it cuts through a mountain range, the chain of Sierras that runs from Alaska to Cape Horn. Ships making the 40-mile passage from Atlantic to Pacific have to be lifted up and let down through a series of locks. The Gatun locks on the Atlantic side lift big ocean-going ships 85 feet in 3 steps. Here, 85 feet above sea level, a great artificial lake was created, 25 miles long, to provide a wide, easy passage for the ships. And where the mountains were highest, this cut was made 8 miles long through solid rock. Even before the Americans came, others had tried to build a canal here. This strip of abandoned water is all that's left of 10 years' work by Ferdinand de Lesseps, the Frenchman who built the Suez Canal. He found the climate, the disease, and the financial corruption in Panama were all too much for him. But he too is commemorated by a statue in Panama City. Panama is full of memorials to the men who contributed to the canal, to George Washington Goethals of the United States Army, the engineer in charge. To Carlos Finlay, who discovered the secret of yellow fever so that the engineers and labourers could work safely. And to the West Indian labourers brought here to dig the canal. Their descendants are still here in the town of Colon at the Atlantic end of the canal. But as you can see, they've not forgotten their native islands. The canal was opened in 1914, just before the First World War broke out in Europe, and immediately it became a vital commercial and strategic route, a funnel for world commerce, as the Americans call it. Now there are 30 or 40 big ships going through every day, 10,000 a year, carrying 60 or 70 million tons of cargo. There are two sets of locks on the Pacific side at Pedro Miguel and Miraflores. Little electric locomotives called mules tow the ships through in a matter of minutes. Panama has always been a strategic spot, ever since Balboa, the Spanish soldier explorer, first crossed the isthmus 450 years ago. Within a few years, the first city of Panama, now in ruins, was built on the Pacific coast. Here, Spanish galleons landed treasure from the west coast of the Americas, to be carried across the jungle trails to the Atlantic on what was called the Camino Real, the Royal Road, which started across this bridge. The Spanish treasure ships were a favorite target for the pirates and buccaneers of the Spanish Main, like Henry Morgan. 300 years ago, his last attack wrecked the old city of Panama. The Spaniards rebuilt it a few miles away, just by what is now the Pacific entrance to the canal. But it's the Americans who matter now. Thousands of them live like colonial settlers in the neat little towns of the canal zone. A strip of land 40 miles long and 5 miles wide on each side of the canal. Theodore Roosevelt leased it from Panama in 1903 for $10 million down and $250,000 a year forever. The annual rent has now been raised to $2 million, but that's still all the government of Panama gets out of the canal. Compared with the bustling and not very orderly republic next door, the canal zone on the other side of the wire fence is neat and tidy and rather military. The Americans have their own postal system with cheaper rates than the republic, and their own shops too. In fact, the whole place is run like a little bit of America. The Canal Zone is a military base, headquarters for the whole Caribbean Command. The Panamanian flag doesn't fly here, except in one place. This is in what's called the Shaler Triangle, a little plot that juts right into the heart of Panama City, under the very windows of the modern Panamanian National Assembly building. This sense of American domination has led to many anti-American demonstrations in Panama in recent years by people who think the Americans ought to get out. Lately, the American government has been trying to meet a few of the demands of these people, and the Americans who live here don't like it, as you may gather from Police Sergeant Rowe, who talked to me as one who was born and bred in the Canal Zone.
What do you think of the American policy now with regard to the Canal Zone and Panama generally? Do you think it's in the best interests of the United States?
I do not believe so. I believe that the pressure that's being applied to the Panama Canal operation and the government of the Panama Canal by the State Department is simply a policy of appeasement that you find with our State Department all over the world today.
Appeasement of what? Of nationalism or?
Appeasement of Panamanian nationalism.
Well, but aren't you afraid that if there isn't some appeasement of this nationalism, that there might in fact be a revolution here?
We've had revolutions before, about a dozen of them, and always cope with them.
And you think you could cope with the next one?
I think that we could.
Don't you think it might be a Castro-type revolution?
At the present time, the Panamanian people are not mentally set up for this type of operation, and nor do they have the physical and mechanical backing to do so in the Republic of Panama now.
You say that the situation here since 1959 has been handled quite satisfactorily, but isn't that largely due to the State Department's Operation Friendship, the program for promoting friendship between Panamanians and United States citizens in the Canal Zone?
Well, that's quite true. However, they are not getting anywhere with it. While they quieted down the general furor in Panama, the gimme, gimme, gimme policy is still in effect.
You mean gimme, gimme, gimme for the Panamanians?
For the Panamanians. They are now after a change in treaty, which is simply to give them more for what they're not putting out for.
You mean they don't deserve more because they don't work hard enough for it?
They don't have any interest in the Panama Canal except a muddy strip of land that I was born on.
You said that the State Department's policy here was one of appeasement, of Panamanian nationalism. We used to hear that sort of talk in Britain about Nasser and Arab nationalism in 1956 when he nationalized the Suez Canal. And then it was the State Department that also supported what you would call appeasement. Do you think that's had any effect here?
It has had a definite effect here. The fact that that our State Department talked the British out of taking definite action in Suez at the time that, of the Suez incident has had nothing but an adverse effect on the Panama Canal and the attitude of the Panamanian government.
And an adverse effect on American interests, do you think?
That's exactly correct.
The Americans are one problem, poverty is the other. And as in so many Latin American countries, it's the existence of poverty like this, side by side with great wealth and power concentrated into the hands of a few rich families, that makes the country's politics so unstable. Just now, the government is talking vaguely about domestic reform, but without actually doing anything much. although naturally their chief spokesman, Senor Velarde, didn't agree when I put this to him.
Fortunately, I can tell you that our government has started since 2 years ago, even before the Alliance for Progress was put forward, a series of social reforms. For instance, we have collected more taxes and expand our tax system to cover more people that should pay it.
But what about the question of land reform? Isn't that the most important?
Right now, we have already, as a matter of fact, distributed some land. And we are undergoing a study to make another complete law or code of laws regulating the land reform in the whole territory.
But do you think that the present landowners, and I believe that there are some 60 families which own quite a large part of the country, do you think that they are going to give up their land voluntarily?
The government will buy that land, which is in private hands, that it feels needs to be distributed. However, we have enough land here that belongs to the government that can be distributed. Usually the land in private ownership is already being exploited or worked. So really what the problem is to get the other land that is not being worked to be distributed.
Yes, when you say it belongs to the government, in effect, doesn't this mean that it belongs to the same families again, because these 60 families do constitute the effective government?
No, sir, I will not say that. Definitely that is not so in Panama. In the government and in very high positions in government and in Congress, we have representatives from many families, many groups of many social standing, from the highest to the lowest.
Well, how was it, if I may interrupt, how was it that in the last elections you outlawed the party of Dr. Arnulfo Arias, which is supposed to be the biggest in the country?
The party of Dr. Arnulfo Arias was not outlawed the last election. It was outlawed 10 years ago when Dr. Arnulfo Arias was put out of power because he broke the constitutional powers endowed to him.
But a lot of people tell me that he still has more support than anybody else.
I imagine that he has a good support. I would not say that he has the biggest, however.
Don't you think some of the people who probably support Dr. Arnulfo Arias are also supporters of Fidel Castro, and that there is a danger of a real Castroist movement here?
I would say that part of the support that Dr. Arias has are also people who are for Castro. However, I wouldn't say that a great percentage of it. Castro has become a disappointment in our people.
Why do you think that?
For he has, or his regime has betrayed the initial revolutionary ideas that we were all for it at the beginning.
You were for it also?
Yes, I was.
And you feel that he has betrayed this through communism?
Yes, through communism and a dictatorship, which is now much worse probably than the one that he helped to overthrow.
But one member of the Panamanian Parliament, Mrs. Thelma King, who's not only pro-Castro, but also uncompromisingly anti-American.
Senora King, what demands would you make of the Americans occupying the canal zone if you had the power?
The only demand that the Panamanians want is to get back the canal zone, because there is no need for 5 miles every side of the canal if it is working all right.
Well, how are you going to set about it?
Well, if they don't do it willingly, we will take the matter to the United Nations.
But you represent only the opposition here. You don't represent the government. How can you get your case before the United Nations?
Well, I am not thinking of doing it now. I will do it when I have power.
And how are you going to get power?
We will get it.
Do you think you'll get it by free vote in the elections?
We will get it by both a revolution, but we will get it.
By revolution?
Yes.
Do you mean a violent revolution?
Yes.
Is this likely to be a Castro-type revolution?
Not exactly, because the problems of Cuba and Panama are some way different, but it will be a violent revolution, yes.
Do you think there's no alternative to a violent revolution?
There is no alternative.
You say that the differences between Cuba and Panama exist. But on the other hand, you have always been a friend of Castro yourself, haven't you?
Yes, I am, because I think that Castro is the only ruler in America who is honest, who has courage, and who is building a new country, who is faithful to his ideals, and I respect every man that is like that.
You don't support him simply because he's anti-American?
Oh no, not only for that. The most important that he is honest and he has courage.
Do you think that his supporters here are very numerous?
Oh yes, very, very numerous.
Are they the strongest element in the country, do you think?
Yes, they are.
And they're the people who would support you in a violent revolution?
I guess so. That don't mean that I have to do the revolution myself. Maybe I will only be a soldier in the revolution.
But somebody is going to stage one.
Oh yes, someone is going to do it.
Mrs. King, who comes from a poor home in Cologne, may have a bark worse than her bite. But in Panama at the moment, it's certainly a popular sort of bark. But there's another kind of trouble just over the horizon. In another 10 years, the Panama Canal may be obsolete. Already the bigger ships, including some American warships, can't get through. American experts seem to think it wouldn't be worth the trouble to enlarge the present canal, and already they're studying alternative sites for a new canal elsewhere in Central America. This will involve some pretty tricky negotiations with other American states. But whatever happens, there isn't likely to be another canal zone. Teddy Roosevelt has been dead for 50 years, and the days of American colonialism are ending too. When you look at Panama and its canal, you're looking at an institution that is already a bit of a museum piece.